On Earth, hurricanes and typhoons are called cyclones and occur over the oceans. The cyclonic storm develops an eye in the center of rotation where high altitude, dry air is drawn down the center. The thing to know is that the eye of a cyclone is a downdraft wind. Over land, we see a different effect. Supercell thunderstorms develop a rotating mesocyclone that rises in a tower that spreads to an anvil cloud. The thing to know is that the center of a thunderstorm is an updraft wind. If you look at these different storms from above, the cyclone blows at the ground and the thunderstorm sucks at the ground. The pattern of wind in each type of storm is due to capacitance in the electrical circuitry of the Earth. The electric winds of a thunderstorm can be likened to a rope. Generally, the rope winds up the towering mesocyclone to a cap, the anvil cloud, and unwinds from there to non-rotating channels of rain flanked by downdraft winds. It is a stack of dielectric layers through which a current flows. Condensing and then freezing moisture in the updraft sheds ionized matter into cold plasma currents that produce rain, lightning, and tornadoes. A massive cold plasma halo in the sky acts like a live electrode hanging over the ground. The updraft current is from ions swept from ground level. It loops through a negative plasma low in the cloud where condensation occurs and continues to a positive plasma in the anvil where ice forms. At each level, the recombined matter, the rain and ice, are shed and returned to ground. Flanking downdraft winds are excess currents of unipolar wind that complete the storm's looping circuit to ground. As negative charge builds in the bottom wet layers of cloud, it strengthens the local electric field and draws winds to it. Above, in the icy layers at high altitude, a positive layer of charge accumulates to balance the charge below, and it spreads out in a huge disk. Likewise, on the ground, below the cloud, positive charge accumulates to balance the cloud charge and feed the central updraft. Lightning arcs contribute to balancing the charged layers, dissipating charge at points of highest potential. But the buildup of charge density around the core of the storm also means there is a secondary vector in the electric field running horizontally through the cloud layers. As ionic matter is drawn to the storm by updraft and concentrated, it depletes charge from the far field region of atmospheric layers, creating local electric fields, which draw current horizontally, transverse to the electric field at the core of the storm. Consensus science has attributed the electrical charge buildup in thunderstorms to static charge from colliding rain and ice. One flaw in this idea is there's nothing static anywhere at any time in any place in a thunderstorm. Everything moves, and that means charge too. And that means one undeniable thing: electric current. In a hurricane, the airflow is very different from a thunderstorm. Consider the wind flow again as a piece of rope. The rope enters whole down the central vortex and unwinds into several threads of vertical up and down drafts flowing radially away from the storm's eye and rotating currents. It's almost the inverse of a thunderstorm. The cyclone's rotating updraft bands are made of thunderstorms, which electrically suggests the entire cyclone is a next-level fractal expression of the thunderstorm, in which the independent loops of thunderstorms maintain their form but have organized together, creating loops within loops, vortices within vortices, fractal repetition of form. And finally, the discharge modes in a thunderstorm are typically vertical winds, lightning, and tornadoes, whereas in hurricanes you get strong rotating winds, cyclones that produce very little lightning, and comparatively weak tornadoes. One reason a cyclone is different from a mesocyclone is that cyclones form over water. The electrode spot on a featureless homogeneous surface of ocean diffuses charge broadly and evenly. On land, there are mountains, mineral, and water deposits that focus the electric field and provide greater conductivity, increasing charge density at elevations. But a cyclone is not the most powerful level of fractal progression for storms on Earth. The next fractal level of plasma form is when a cyclone and a mesocyclone organize. This creates the most destructive storms of all, at least that we see today. In our historic period, we don't see storms that exceed the level of the so-called perfect storm. When mesocyclone and cyclone come together, they produce a current loop. In our present climate on Earth, the perfect storm is as bad as it gets, but we are only seeing an echo of the drama of primordial storms. Even though we see lightning and devastating 300-mile-per-hour winds, violent enough to destroy our matchstick homes, it does not scour us with supersonic winds, hot plasma tornadoes, and electric arcs that shape mountain ranges. But it did at some point long ago.
Or maybe not so long ago? To me, this sounds exactly like the biblical descriptions of the return of the Son of Man in Aquarius, and those described by Chan Thomas in his book, The Adam and Eve Story.
Updraft winds of mesocyclones and downdraft eyes of cyclones became supersonic jet streams. An energized geomagnetic field amplified the magnetic flux in coronal loops, generating co-rotating storms that sucked and blew at the land, leaving vast craters and domes. The ring currents multiplied too, generating smaller harmonic repetitions, more intense fractal repetitions that produce hot, probably glowing plasma tornadoes and incredibly huge arcs, large enough to boil a mountain from the earth.
How will it be, this end of which I once heard you speak, brother Enning?
It will be as 'twere a mighty rending in the sky, and the mountains shall sink and the valleys shall rise.
And will there be a mighty wind?
Certainly there will be a mighty wind, if the word of God is anything to go by.
Will this wind be so mighty as to lay low the mountains of the earth?
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now is the end. Perish the world. It was GMT, wasn't it? Never mind, lads. Same time tomorrow.
As fractal evolution progresses with the application of a larger electric field, thunderstorm cells multiply and their downdrafts grow to cyclones until multivortex systems spin within multivortex systems, which are within multivortex systems. We rarely think of vertical winds unless we are right under them, and then it's considered unusual and an often catastrophic event. Downbursts, tornadoes, and related vertical effects, lightning and storm surge, are the most destructive elements of storms. Vertical winds impact smaller regions, but are far more violent than horizontal winds. In primordial storms, vertical winds literally blow towards the land and sucked at it like a vacuum hose. We can see this in the geology. If you strip away the hydrodynamics of a dense atmosphere, fully ionize the environment to see the raw electric currents in a hot plasma, it's like seeing an X-ray view of a storm. Capacitors are used in electronics and power supply systems to control current flow. They are composed of two conductive plates facing each other with a gap between. The gap is filled with a dielectric material that resists current flow, and in its intended operation, current does not pass through the dielectric. Current results from charge buildup and discharge from the plates on either side of the gap. But what we are interested in for this discussion is how a capacitor fails. A capacitor fails when current actually flows through the dielectric. It's termed dielectric breakdown and occurs when the voltage applied to the capacitor exceeds its capacity to store charge on the plates. The dielectric fails to resist the electric field across it and it sparks. That is what we see when lightning strikes, the dielectric breakdown of the layer of air between a cloud and ground. An ionized channel develops in the dielectric and the built-up charge on the plate suddenly dumps through the channel. We see the discharge as almost instantaneous, but in reality, there's a period prior when the dielectric absorbs charge and builds the ionized channel. In storms on Earth, the same looping current flows are in the form of weak plasma winds because the atmosphere is only partially ionized. Cold plasma is mixed with neutral species, so thermoelectric and hydrodynamic effects come into play, raising the complexity, but the underlying electric circuit remains the same.
But what if our atmosphere was much more charged not so long ago? People in the 1700s were wearing lightning hats and lightning umbrellas with grounding chains to dissipate a lightning strike. And they were taking portable lightning rods, which you can still buy on eBay today, to picnics in their parks. Obviously, you don't go out to the park in a thunderstorm, so why were they afraid of lightning on a sunny picnic day? Is it plausible that the Earth's atmospheric charge is a closed circuit which gets built up over 400 years of relatively peaceful electric field stability, but has to discharge and equalize during these grand solar minimums, when its equilibrium becomes unbalanced due to the sun's electromagnetic decay, and that the atmospheric destructive storms and the Earth's corresponding volcano and quake activity are simply the natural effects of exactly this cause? The problem is, the oceans of the world are littered with ancient underwater ruins, always within 200 feet of water. So did these places sink, or did sea levels rise? And could constant storms really cause a 200-foot ocean level rise? The genius occultist, astrologer, and biochemist Dr. Inez Perry said of the age of Aquarius, "In its readjustment, some parts of the globe will go down, while at the same time islands will appear, new continents will rise, land will be purified, restored, and refreshed, and there shall be a new heaven and a new earth. This will be literally and physiologically true." She also stated that it is quite possible that it will eventually be discovered that maps of the Earth, as presented on globes, are not based on facts. 32nd degree Freemasons are finally given a copy of Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma, in which the secret of their logo is finally revealed to the Master Mason. The square is a right angle formed by two right lines. It is adapted only to a plane surface and belongs only to geometry, earth measurement, that trigonometry which deals only with planes, and with the earth, which the ancients supposed to be a plane. The compass describes circles and deals with spherical trigonometry, the science of the spheres and heavens. The former, therefore, is an emblem of what concerns the earth and the body, the latter of what concerns the heavens and the soul. Yet the compass is also used in plane trigonometry, as in erecting perpendiculars. If you ever wondered why NASA and the military are littered with high-ranking Freemason shitheads, now you know. But the island of Saltholm lies between Copenhagen, Denmark, and Malmö, Sweden. It has an average height of 3 feet above sea level, with a highest point of only 16 feet. Humans have lived in small numbers on Saltholm since the Middle Ages and probably before. The existence of the island is first attested in 1230 AD, when King Valdemar II of Denmark is recorded as having given Saltholm to Bishop Niels Steensen of the See of Roskilde for quarrying limestone. Yet somehow it's still there today, 3 feet above sea level, while Friesland, Palau, and Old California are now completely underwater, despite being on maps from before the 1650 Maunder Grand Solar Minimum Earth changes. So either these other islands sunk underwater, or somehow it is possible for sea level to rise hundreds of feet in some places, while not rising at all in other places nearby. Otherwise, Saltholm would be no more. In fact, Denmark itself is a very flat, low-to-sea level country, and still looks the same today as it did on maps from the 1500s and mid-1600s. So why isn't Denmark underwater as well? The theories of plate tectonics moving, rising, and sinking in certain places but not others could very well explain this phenomenon, though allegedly they are moving all of the time, and there has been no satisfactory scientific explanation as to why all of these earthquake and larger volcanoes go so hyperactive during grand solar minimums. There is also the idea that we live in an enclosed, gas-pressurized system that goes through cycles of compression and decompression, which could push down in certain areas during a pressure adjustment event or let loose and allow other areas to rise again. But other than the bulging of continents in the center, we have personally seen no map evidence of new continents rising, only the disappearance of land masses. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It just means it's out of the scope of our own personal research. It is possible that massive underwater volcanic activity could create new land masses as well. We'll have to leave that to the volcanists, geologists, and your own imagination. Speaking of disappearing land masses, we do have to address the elephant in the room. On maps predating the 1600s by the world's best cartographers like Mercator, they insisted there were 4 continents surrounding a giant magnetic mountain called Meru, and that this land is what old books and legends called Hyperborea. It sits exactly where we are told the frozen North Pole sits today. A curious thing happens when you visit there on Google Earth. A strange white and black line appears right where Mount Meru should be. Not only that, but you can see blatant sunken continents underneath the water. You have to wonder, what is that they're hiding? Then you have the 1582 Monte Planisphere map, showing a huge ring of continents completely mapped out with detailed rivers, lakes, towns, creatures, kingdoms, etc., surrounding the Earth as we know it today, drawn completely accurate itself. This map is 10 feet by 10 feet and would have taken him years to draw in full detail. Those outer continents alone would have taken a year to draw. What, he just made it all up? In fact, his map shows the Panama Canal was already there in 1582, even though we allegedly built it in 1902. Or did we just dig it back out? Monte's outer continent ring sits right where the flat Earth researchers claim there is a wall of ice or liquefied air surrounding us. As with Mercator, he too had a detailed map of the 4 continents of Hyperborea in the North Pole. So what happened in the 1600s? I know, you want to hear about gigantic space asteroids smashing into the Earth and destroying the dinosaurs and all life on it. We've already discussed the idea that comets, being space snowballs, is a fabrication, and really a local electromagnetic atmospheric phenomenon, as orbiting spaceballs don't turn and change direction, and there are hundreds of written historical accounts of comets doing exactly that throughout the ages, sometimes even changing opposite directions back and forth every few nights, most especially in the Book of Miracles. So what about meteorites? Could they also be the same? What about the meteor pieces we find all over the Earth? It is theorized by Russian researchers that meteors are not stones that melt down and burn due to friction and heat from atmospheric resistance upon entry. Meteors appear in the upper atmosphere, usually 90 to 150 kilometers up, as a circular-shaped light dragging a thin, luminous trail. During the fall, the headlight increasingly amplifies and then expands into a bright flash, followed by what appears like a breaking up into smaller parts that immediately disappear without touching the ground at around 40 to 60 kilometers up. They postulate that the light is not from the fire of burning stone, but rather electricity in the form of electrical discharge. The electric field is permanently present in the higher layers of atmosphere, where air and atmospheric gases act as an electric field conductor. During discharge, electrons and ions get pulsed, accelerated, collided, and multiplied by the electric field, which spreads through the entire path like lightning in the lower atmosphere, until the glowing energy ball turns into a glittering electric flash like the head of a sparkler. And due to particle collision into electrons and ions, the temperature increases due to higher energy ionization, and that manifests as a strong flash of light, like a lightning strike or ball lightning. The meteors finally fizzle out at the lower, denser layers of the atmosphere due to reduced conductivity there, possibly due to the dielectric constant of nitrogen, which makes up 78% of the atmosphere. Nitrogen can normally prevent or rapidly quench electric discharges. The number of positive ions in the upper atmosphere decline as we get lower in the upper atmospheric layer toward the lower atmosphere. Also, with increased pressure in the lower layers of the atmosphere, electrical conductivity is normally reduced. Just like so-called cosmic rays, positive ions lose their energy in collision with electrons, atoms, and particulate molecules, and after a short excited state, return to a lower stable energy state. Another observation is that we always see them coming down or across on diagonal angles, appearing suddenly and silently, and sometimes a ripping thunder sound can be heard behind. If we were living on this, We should observe them as coming up, down, and all around, but they never do. The highest terminal velocity speed freefall set by a human was 167 meters per second. Yet these space rocks, with no propulsion system and no aerodynamic design, are clocked at 10 to 40 kilometers per second, and from appearance to final discharge is usually 2 to 20 seconds. The American Meteor Society can tell you exactly what days and times the annual meteor showers will come and where in the sky to find them, which suggests a normal cyclical electrical phenomenon, not random space rocks, or you would see them in different times and places if we were doing this. You've been in a thunderstorm. Various temperatures, pressure, and atmospheric composition manifest various electrical discharges. Meteors shimmer different colors near the active electric field: orange, yellow, greenish white, blue, green, silver, purple, just like the noble gases in the upper atmosphere. Why would falling rocks explode in a glittery flash, and why don't we see fiery rocks falling to the ground right after? Heat, fuel, and oxygen are needed for fire. There would be plenty of friction heat in oxygen, but what fuel does a falling rock have? You can heat rocks with another fuel supply, but they don't heat themselves. Most meteors do not leave a lingering tail after fizzle out, but it is proposed that when they do, a passage of electrical discharge through the atmospheric gases creates a pillar of highly ionized energized air, a heated cloud filled with electrically charged ion particles and electrons generated by the movement of electricity through a gaseous substance which forms an unstable chemical state in their composition due to heat effect. As the electric field effect terminates, the ions get rapidly recombined and return to their previous stable and normal chemical state, creating a ripping sound by the sudden spread of gases due to temperature differences inside and outside of the meteor's electric field. But what happens if the electrical charge conditions change in the lower atmosphere and/or the nitrogen state changes to lose its dielectric constant? Contrary to popular belief, the air or ether is not oxygen. Only 21% of it is. 78% is nitrogen, and 0.003% is CO2. So if you think your breath and farts are ruining the planet, you might be a fucking idiot. But back to the 78% nitrogen. Nitrogen loses its dielectric constant and becomes highly conductive and volatile when turned from air to liquid form or near liquid, which simply requires a reduction in temperature, like a grand solar minimum or ice age, and an increase in pressure, like major volcanic particulate eruptions and cloud formations into an enclosed pressure system. It might surprise you that no meteorite has ever been observed to make contact with the ground. The Earth is littered with what lamestream science tells us are meteorite impact craters. But as we just saw, all meteorites come down on a diagonal angle and break up into smaller pieces. These craters are all perfectly round with the same depth and wall height. They should be long, dragged-out craters with a higher wall at the end if they were giant space rocks crashing in at supersonic speeds from an angle. Some claim they are nuclear blast sites from an ancient nuclear war, as mentioned in the Indian Vedas and Mahabharata, though they look exactly like the sputtering electric discharge domes that Andrew Hall mentioned earlier. Whatever they aren't space rock craters.
The dome structure of the plateau and the canyons carved through it is primarily the result of natural sputtering discharge process, created during an intense electrical storm, when Earth's electric field was amplified to the point the entire atmosphere was ionized. Imagine the atmosphere stirred into a maelstrom, lit with streamers of glowing plasma, where lightning crackled, not only in the sky, but across the land, and mountaintops glowed with coronal fire under swirling clouds of dusky plasma. It would have been surreal, a place where streams of wind became electric currents,
But meteorite pieces are found all around the world. They aren't in huge craters, only in what you'd expect if you'd pushed a boulder off of a skyscraper. In the town of Krzevci, northern Croatia, 3 meteorites with identical chemical and gem composition fell in the exact same place 3 different times in 2007, 2011, and 2012. It's hard to imagine how this is even remotely possible if we are living on this. However, the plot thickens, because during the 2011 event, the Croatian Meteor Network actually filmed the atmospheric meteor phenomenon from several different cameras, and an observatory in nearby Slovenia captured the very beginning of the phenomenon. Just as we discussed earlier, the bright light broke up into severe fragmentation at 60 to 31 kilometers up, as always. You could argue that the government planted the meteorites as a conspiratorial cover-up, but do these look like government spooks to you? Meteorites are made of mostly iron, with additional nickel, silicon, cobalt, germanium, titanium, iridium, copper, zinc, chrome, olivine gems, and some minerals. Some people suspect that this dome or enclosure is not the Van Allen radiation belts or some magnetic flip ring, but that it's an actual physical iron and gem dome, and that these meteorites we find are actually pieces falling down from the dome. This would go a long way as to explain how on God's earth we could possibly live in a pressurized atmospheric gas system when NASA tells us that space is a vacuum, which we all know a vacuum needs a physical barrier, which is the reason your vacuum cleaner has a bag. Otherwise, space would suck our atmosphere right off our planet, and yet they also claim the universe is an ever-expanding space vacuum. Well, what bag is around space if it's ever expanding? While paradoxically, a confined vacuum. This idea obviously scares the hell out of people, because no longer are you a meaningless accidental speck of Big Bang dust in infinite space. You have to ponder the dirty G word, no, not that one, this one, and say, well, if everything came from nothing, well then who's this guy? The idea that we live in a computer simulation or are just some science experiment on the desk of some higher being is a very old one. There are fringe researchers and people out there who take the Bible and mythology literally and believe that we do live in exactly something like that. A giant mechanical machine with a physically constructed exterior and even working machine parts underneath us, which control the tides, winds, ocean levels, volcanic vents, earth plate pressure tectonics, even the movement of the sun, moon, wandering planets and stars on either a rotating mechanical dome above us and around us or magnetically inside of it. We're already way off the deep end here, so I don't want to dwell on it too much, but there are some curious things worth looking at this theory. It suggests that the cataclysm resets could be actual highly advanced technological machines that clean out the fish tank, so to speak, and that the stars are the maintenance calendar. The Hebrew Bible uses very mechanical translations to describe the flood events. A floodgate is a gate used to control the flow of a body of water, something that restrains a flood or outpouring, or an adjustable gate or valve used to control the flow of water through a sluice, which is an artificial channel.
The springs of the deep and the floodgates of the heavens were closed, and the rain from the sky was restrained. And after 7 days the floodwaters came upon the earth. All the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. Yet he commanded the clouds above and opened the doors of the heavens. The fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. Behold, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, thou shalt see it with thine eyes.
Dante's Inferno speaks of the 9 levels of hell below the earth. In fact, Hell and Niflheim are the names of the underworld in Norse mythology.